Hello there, and welcome to this video on the Daystate Blackwolf. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to change out the air supply of the rifle, so we're going to be completing a cylinder conversion. What this means is that we'll be swapping out the bottle for a cylinder, although the information in this video will also be relevant when changing from a cylinder over to a bottle. With that said, on screen now will be a complete list of all the tools that I'm going to use in order to carry out this procedure. It includes all of the Allen key sizes, all of the spanner sizes, and finally any Daystate specific tooling required to complete the job. The only other thing I'll mention before we get started is that this particular rifle is obviously in the walnut stock. However, the information in this video will also be relevant to the carbon grey rifles as well as the laminate rifles. The chassis rifles are slightly different as the fore end of the rifles is slightly different. However, the mechanics will be the same. The only difference will be in the stocks. With that all said and done, we can get started on the job. And the first thing we need to do is cock the rifle, remove the single shot loader or magazine if one has been fitted. Then we would close the bolt and fire the rifle into a nice safe backstop. What this does is ensure that there's not a pellet loaded into the barrel and that it's safe to proceed. I've already done that just to save us a little bit of time, so the next thing we can do is remove the stock. And to start off with, we're just going to be removing the safety, so the small button in the side of the stock, and that's going to be done using a T10 Torx bit. As you remove that, just make sure you don't lose any of the parts. So there are 3 parts in total: the screw, the spacer, and then the safety. With that done, we'll flip the rifle up, then remove the Foster fitting cap. Then once that's done, we can remove the stock bolt using a 5mm Allen key. And there we have the stock removed. We'll put this to one side, we'll be needing this shortly, but for now we'll continue disassembling the action. The next thing we'll do is fully degas the rifle, and that's going to be done using a deep 10mm socket. What we need to do is locate the Foster fitting on the bottom of the rifle, then use our 10mm socket to crack the Foster fitting loose. After about a turn or so, air should start to leak out of the joint between the Foster fitting and the regulator housing, and then we would simply need to let the rifle fully degas. So waiting until the hissing stopped, then we could take a look at the gauges on the rifle. This one here shows us our bottle pressure, and the one on the other side shows us our regulated air pressure. Now when you loosen the Foster fitting, the bottle pressure gauge, this one here, will start to drop and then eventually reach 0. And once that happens, you need to check the regulator gauge to make sure that's on 0 as well. It's not uncommon for the regulator to still seal when you have loosened the Foster fitting. So if this gauge on this side is still seeing pressure, what you'd need to do then is come to the back of the rifle, locate the power wheel, spin this onto the minimum setting, then dry fire the rifle again into a nice safe backstop until this gauge here reads 0. Once both gauges are reading 0, then we can continue on with the process. And the next thing I'm going to do is optional, but it does make things a lot easier, and that is removing the barrel. So on the top of the block there we have 2 grub screws, and I'm going to be loosening those using a 3mm Allen key. Once both grub screws are loose, we can slide the barrel out through the front of the block, then safely put that over to one side. With that said, the next thing we can do is remove our bottle or cylinder. So at this point, both rifles function exactly the same way, so we need to unscrew the bottle or cylinder from the regulator housing, putting that nice and safely over to one side. Next thing we're going to be doing is removing the regulator housing from the main block. This is done by loosening the 4 securing screws on the block itself, and on this rifle, as it is a sub 12 pound rifle, it is fitted with an anti-tamper screw in the corner here, so I'm going to be removing that using the anti-tamper removal tool. The other 3 bolts are just regular bolts, so we can remove those using a 4mm Allen key. The next thing we can do is remove the housing from the main block, then put that safely over to one side. Before I do that though, I am just going to show you the difference between the two units. This one here is fitted to the cylinder rifle, and this one here is obviously the bottle rifle version. Both units are exactly the same, apart from the threads around the end here. So I'll just get you a very quick look at those. With the housing removed from the main block, the next thing I'll do is just run through the components that you get in the kit. So starting off, we're going from a bottle to a cylinder. So the cylinder conversion kit is these parts at the top here. We have our housing, so our housing with the cylinder threads. We have our cylinder as well as our end cap. We also have the cylinder cage. This gets installed into the stock. And then to go with that, we also have an M-lock fitting and then a small bag of screws. If you were going from cylinder to bottle, you wouldn't be getting a cage, you'd just be getting the bottle and the bottle version of the regulator housing. One thing I will make you aware of though, is that when you get the new housing, it will be bare. So you won't have a regulator, Foster fitting, gauges or anything like that in the unit. This is done purely and solely to keep costs down. Obviously, regulators and things of that nature are fairly expensive to buy, and you don't want to be buying them again, so the unit will come bare. We simply need to swap out the components from our original system into the new one. So for now, I'll get these components put to one side, and we'll start work on stripping down our regulator housing. Right then, stripping down the housing is really nice and simple. The first thing we're going to do is remove the Foster fitting from the bottom. This is the part that we loosened when we degassed the rifle. As you remove that, just make sure the one-way valve in the back, this component here, is in place, and the 8th BSP Doughty washer is in place as well. With that done, whilst we're here, we can install that on the new component by just screwing it into this hole in the bottom of the unit. Getting that done up with a deep 10mm socket. The next thing we'll do is remove the regulator from the base of the unit, and we're going to be doing that using the Daystate specific regulator removal tool. However, if you didn't have the tool, you could also just use a pair of snap ring pliers. So with our regulator removed, just make sure the piston is in place in the bottom. Then before this goes into the new housing, I am just going to be adding a very small amount of silicone grease to the 3 O-rings around the body of the unit. With that done, we can get the regulator screwed into our housing. And then the next thing we'll remove are the 2 gauges. To start off with, we're going to be removing the gauge covers, so these plastic parts around the outside of the gauges. Now these will be done up fairly tight from the factory. What they typically do is push them in place and then set them using a small amount of glue. So what you may have to do to start off with is twist the gauge covers loose, then pull them off. What you can do then is clean the glue from the inside of the unit, and then it should pull off and go back on nice and easily. So there's one removed, we'll remove the other one as well. This one on this side is a little looser, but the next thing we'll do is remove the gauges themselves, and that's done with a 22mm spanner. The gauges typically won't be done up mega tight. And then the next thing we can remove is the 2 O-rings, one on either side from each gauge hole. And to do that, I'm just going to be using a small plastic O-ring pick. With the O-rings removed from the old housing, we can now put this over to one side and start work on our new housing. The last thing obviously we need to do is install our gauges. So to begin with, we're just taking our O-rings, adding a small amount of silicone grease to them, placing them in the base of the threads, just like so. Then we can come through with our gauges. So on this side of the unit, we need to install the Daystate marked gauge. Getting that done up into place. Then on the other side, we can again take our O-ring, add a small amount of silicone grease to it, and get that pushed into the threads. and then tighten our gauge up onto it. And then on this side, we need to install the Humour branded gauge. Now at this point you can see that the gauge itself hasn't done up square with the housing, so what we can do is back the gauge off a couple of turns, then tighten it down once again, feeling as to when the gauge itself touches the O-ring. Once it's touched the O-ring, we can come through and gently get the gauge tightened into position, and as long as the gauge is tightening onto the O-ring, it should seal. So in other words, the gauge itself doesn't need to be done up tight in order to seal properly. As long as the bottom of the gauge is tightening up onto the O-ring, it should seal no problem whatsoever. With that done, I'll just remove some of the excess grease, and then we can install the gauge covers on. There we have it, there's our housing fully rebuilt. With our new regulator housing built back up, we can now get that married up to the main block. So to start off with, we're going to be taking a small amount of silicone grease and adding it to this internal O-ring here. So just a small amount will do us. Making sure that gets coated. Then we can take our new housing and install that into this position here. With that done, we can take our 4 securing screws and get them dropped into the face. These screws here are all the same length, so there is no orientation. So what you saw me do there is get all 4 screws installed, feel the side of the block just to make sure it's not misaligned with the main action, then get everything done up nice and tight with a 4mm Allen key. As this is a sub 12 rifle, I did also reinstall the small anti-tamper bolt on the front there, but again this procedure is exactly the same no matter which housing you're installing. The next thing we can do is install our cylinder, and before this gets screwed onto the action, I am just going to install the end cap, this piece here. Before this goes in though, I do want to mention that we do have a small amount of laser engraving on the side of the tube here. This can be installed in any orientation. Typically speaking, the laser engraving is aligned with the front of the rifle so that it can always be read. However, I like to install it at the back just so the writing is hidden whilst the rifle is in its stock. But whatever the case, the next thing we need to do is add a good amount of silicone grease to these 2 O-rings here. A good amount to these 2 O-rings, as the O-rings themselves have to travel through a thread and the silicone grease just helps them through that. With that done, we can get that screwed into the end of the cylinder. At the moment, I've got the cylinder end cap done up as tight as I can by hand. However, as you can see at the end there, we still have a little way to go. So what I'm going to do here is just use a pair of 5mm drill bits to install them into the holes there, then use something like an Allen key to help me tighten up the end cap. If you didn't have 2 5mm drill bits on hand, you could also use a M5 screw, and these screws in the front of the block here are M5, so you could use 2 of those as well. Just be nice and careful not to slip when you're doing it up. With that said though, we can take our cylinder and install it onto our action, and to start off with we're going to be taking some silicone grease once again and adding it to these 2 O-rings here. Again, a good amount here. And then with that done, we can get our cylinder screwed on. With that done, the next thing we'll do is get the barrel reinstalled into the block. And to do that, that's nice and simple. What we need to do is locate these 2 dimples in the top of the barrel and align them with the top of the block. So these 2 grub screws here, and the 2 dimples should line up nicely. To make sure everything's in line, what I like to do is remove one of the grub screws, take a quick look through the hole in the top of the action, make sure everything's lined up, then get our grub screw done up nice and tightly using a 3mm Allen key. With that done, that's the action pretty much complete. The only other thing we would need to do is gas the rifle back up, shoot the rifle over a chronograph to make sure nothing has changed, then leak test the rifle to make sure we have no leaks in our system. We do have a full strip down and rebuild of the Daystate Blackwolf on the Daystate YouTube channel, so if you do have a leak, I would highly recommend watching the video as I walk through each and every leak spot on the rifle, as well as the cause and fix to the problem. Before the action goes back in the stock, we do have to make a couple of changes, and that revolves around the cylinder cage. So we're going to be installing this as we're going from a bottle to a cylinder. However, if you're going from a cylinder to a bottle, you would need to remove this. To start off with, no matter which way round we're doing things, we need to flip the stock up and locate these two screws here, and we're going to be removing those using a T20 Torx bit. As you remove those, just keep your finger or hand on the other side of the stock and catch the nuts as they fall off. As you can see there, we have the screw and the nut, and as this is the bottle one, we've got a short screw. So I'll put that over to one side and do the same for the other one. So there we have it, there's those two components removed. With those screws removed and put safely over to one side, we can either install or remove the cylinder cage. We're going to be installing it. So to begin with, we'll be keeping the M-lock cover in position, flipping the rifle over, then just sliding that into position. It only keys in one way, so you can't get it wrong. And then we're going to be taking the two long screws, so these two here, and getting them installed in these two holes here. With that done, we can take our two nuts, these two pieces here, and get them installed on the other side of the screws. And I'll just get you a quick look at the back side of the cylinder cage so you can see where the nuts go. So there we have it, there's our cylinder cage installed and fixed into position. The next thing we can do is install the other M-lock rail into the front of the stock, so just here. This one is held in by two self-tapping screws, so those two there. So we'll get those installed in the screw holes, and once again get them done up with a T20 Torx bit. And there we have it, there's the cylinder cage installed onto the front of the rifle. If we wanted to remove this, all we would need to do is loosen those two screws there, take the cage off, replace the long bolts with the short ones, so these two that we took off earlier, and get the M-lock plate installed correctly, as well as the nuts on the back. With that all said and done, the last thing we can do is get the action reinstalled into the stock, and again that's nice and easy. All we do is line things up nicely, slide this action into place, flip the stock over, then install the stock bolt in the base, getting that done up nice and tightly with a 5mm Allen key. With that done, we can install our dust cap for the filler port, and then install our safety. So on this side, I'm going to be installing the safety blank, this piece here, getting the keys, so the key itself aligned with the key in the side of the rifle. Then we can flip the rifle over and do the same on the other side. Right then, with that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting or useful, and we'll see you in the next one.